Our next presenters are Tom Debevoise and Denis Gagné. Denis already is presented and you know him, and I just want to tell a few words about Tom. I know Tom for many years since he used to be a chief scientist for different rule engine companies. And I understand today Tom independent software consultant and developers and works very closely with Denis, especially in the area of integration LLMs and Trisotech decision intelligence tools. And they're going to present quite interesting AI assistants for contracts workflow. And without further delay, Tom, Denis, take over.
Okay, thanks. This is Tom speaking, of course. Thank you for that kind introduction. So let's talk about what we're going to discuss today. So the Knowledge Worker Copilot is actually a piece of software. It's not a consulting framework or an approach. And it uses the power of an AI digital assistant to coordinate knowledge worker processes. And we're going to describe what those are that implement decision making. And it does this with natural language understanding. And our objective is to tackle the part of an organization's workflow that involves tasks that are not easily automated with traditional programming or business process management. And we focus the tools, the tasks, and so forth on the Office suites like Google Workspace or Office 365. So we can create and manage contacts, email messages, calendar events, and file artifacts. And we do all of this in the context of a contract which defines constraints and things that have to be done. And we're using prompts and large language language models.
Your slides are not advancing, Tom. So you're sharing only the top.
There. Thank you. I was looking at the wrong slide. Okay. So I'm on bullet point 3, how we're leveraging AI. So we're using large prompts and large language models to respond to requests and create natural language understanding, basically, and entity extraction. And finally, we'll give a brief overview of the architecture of the Knowledge Worker Copilot. So what is the problem we're trying to solve? Right. A little bit of history here. Here's quite a crew. And going back in 2016, when we were up in New York, we were discussing how do you extract business rules from regulatory requirements and how do you implement them in decision logic? Fast forward a little bit, I started working with a real estate organization in doing transaction management. Transaction management involves all of the activities and compliance stuff and inspections that you have to do in order to sell a property. And it's a fairly complex problem that involves a lot of email, right? A lot of email and calendaring. So in the course of doing this, we started to say, well, we're looking at these emails coming in and out. How can we extract entities and context out of those emails? And then finally, what we're going to show today is the result of all of these years of research, where we're actually using large language models to do entity extraction and also context determination.
Yeah. So and for everybody, the context that Tom is providing here is basically what we've been presenting. So those are the last 3 years presentation we've done at DecisionCAMP. So covering our evolution towards that solution.
Yeah, and a lot has changed in terms of entity extraction, and it's kind of a little beyond the presentation, but it's a lot simpler now with large language models. So let's go. So the Copilot is a software product, and it's designed to be installed and run in your organization. So it's a combination of artificial intelligence and business process management, and I would say decision management too, right? And as you are executing a contract, it monitors and updates that to-do list, the schedules, the constraints and conditions of that contract, and it does this with natural language understanding. On top of that, the reason we believe we can use this approach is that we use implicit processes and as they're performing these contracts in terms of requests, reviews, and approvals. And then finally, of course, we create and manage emails and all types of different artifacts.
And what's really important here is that we're doing this from none of the particular realm of control point of view. So this is multiple stakeholder or participants that are collaborating around a particular goal, which is to meet the requirement of the contract. And all these different stakeholders are interacting in non-sequential way, completing different portion. And so the knowledge worker co-pilot is there to coordinate and make sure that things are achieved in due time and in the order specified in the contract.
So let's talk a bit about knowledge worker processes.
Your slide didn't.
There's been a. Okay, are we there? Oh. Okay, there we go. I was scrolling on the wrong thing. Just briefly, a knowledge worker. There's been a lot of writing about it, and the definition of what they are has evolved over time, right? But we do know that they are increasingly important in the enterprise, and there's a lot written on that, including the recent World Economic Forum basically implied that up to 70 to 80% of our organization ultimately is going to be a knowledge worker. So why hasn't business process management and decision management, for that matter, served the needs of the business process of the knowledge worker? Basically, what I call the process automation delusions, right? The knowledge worker largely interacts with other individuals through non-digitized forms, through emails and file attachments and so forth, right? And because until recently, the industry has had no real way to interact, to do entity extraction or context understanding of those messages, they minimized that, and in fact called them low frequency process variants that cannot be automated, right? Well, we're saying we can automate them, but from my standpoint, if you look at the presentations and the numbers from business process management and decision modeling, right, the whole industry is sort of stagnated. It's pretty much the same type of argumentation you see in the presentation, the same type of volume and numbers that you see. They keep saying, we keep hearing that it's going to grow, it's going to explode, but it isn't, right? It's pretty much stayed the same for the last 10 years or even a little bit more. So who is the knowledge worker? The knowledge worker is someone who creates something of economic value using their education, training, and understanding, right? This creation process cannot really be digitized, but knowledge workers go through a process in creating those things. They have to interact with other members of the organization and request reviews and approvals, request their trading partners or other members to provide input into this item of economic value. And so those are the processes that they go through. Traditional BPM modeling, and even decision modeling for that matter, does not work in this realm, because you need to be able to understand the context of the files and the messages, and you have to be able to extract entities out of those in order to do that modeling. So in addition, we have an accelerated employment role where the knowledge worker has to do more with less in more complex values. And as we already mentioned, knowledge workers are increasingly important, because their roles, the stuff cannot be really easily digitized.
And while we're using the term processes, here, what we're really talking about are those what are usually called adaptive processes or evolutionary type of processes. So those are not the prescripted or even variants of a prescripted template. Here we're talking about something that completely evolve over time, depending on events that are happening in terms of communication and business events.
Exactly. That's a good point, right? Something can happen in the course of running this process, and you have to add a new thread to the process. So for instance, if I inspect the property and I find structural damage, then I have to start a whole new process. And that's just a sub example. Again, we've kind of covered this point, but if you look at the highly static sort of processes like order to cash or onboarding or supply chain management and Internet of Things and so forth, these things have already been digitized, right? And before the rise of large language models, right, understanding the text and the context was difficult and expensive, right? And we went through this already, because you have to utilize pre-trained entity recognition models, and you have to create all of your own context around it. So the large language model helps you with that. And it's basically simple, accurate, and inexpensive with the large language model. Denis, you have?
No, fine.
Okay. So let's look, the use case that we're dealing with is real estate closing contract, right? So there's many different iterations of what happens when you sell a property. You have different financing vehicles. You can have about 10 different inspections with destroying insect, water, septic fields, and other environmental inspections. And then you're required, according to different contracts, to provide different types of notifications to buyers and sellers. On top of that, each state is different, each laws are different, and the constraints and conditions defined by that contract is different. So, however, what we've discovered, and we'll cover very briefly, that prompts in the large language model are relatively simple, a bit tedious, but are relatively simple to build. Whereas, as we said before, the way you would build these things is through pre-trained entity recognition software, and then building your own context dialect that understands where that entity occurs and so forth. A lot of that is handled by the large language model.
And so what Tom is referring a lot to entity extraction, and basically that is because one of the challenges in these highly adaptive type of processes or environment is that you have to have an understanding of what's going on. And this understanding comes from semantic lifting, going from what's textually written there to the concept they're trying to communicate or act upon. And the benefit we have by starting with the contract provides us with the grounding context. So the contract is basically the constraint of our world in which we're operating, and we're looking at all this activity and extracting the entities so we can understand the concepts that are being tackle by the different activities and communication and relate them back to that context.
Yes. And again, a side note that we also talked about that was that as we're the knowledge worker process is running, we also collect all the communications associated with the execution of that, so that there are topics that occur away from the contract, which are important to completing the sale, such as the buyer has an issue with the roof or wants to know when the bus arrives. We collect all that information and provide that to the actors and say, what are the issues associated with this? So we're not the activity of the contract is constraining, and what we need to do and when we need to do is constraining, but the information that we gather is not. So let's look at another. So what do we get out of this? And we'll show it briefly in our little demo, right? We have contacts, or contacts are roles like the buyer, the seller, the buyer's agent, the seller's agent, and they have responsibilities in contacting, executing the contact. Contact events are milestones that occur. They can either have a date or can be computed from other information, right? Conditions are constraints that arise in the conduct of the contract. For instance, a condition might be that the buyer is using cash, and then we add the constraint that he has to provide proof of the availability of that cash by a certain date. And then we get into deliverables. Deliverables are work items that are created by the contract. They could, and in the case of the sales contract, the deliverable frequently is inspections of the property, but there's also certain certifications and documents such as the homeowner HOA agreements that have to be provided. So these three concepts kind of work together to create our generic to-do list. So let's just quickly, all right, just a fragment. We go into the wood infested, this section from the real estate sales contract, which is in nearly every sales contract in the United States, is that the seller has to provide basically a termite inspection report at the earliest date, no more than 30 days than prior to the date of settlement, right? If it's too far back, they're concerned that some ongoing damage might occur. So I have an event and a condition here. The event is an inspection date, 30 days prior to settlement, right? And you notice that I have the curly braces there, so I am extracting the variables like the property address and the settlement date later in the contract and filling them in. And then the condition, again, is something that's either true or false. It's part of our to-do list. Like, have we done this, or is this particular constraint or condition fired with respect to the contract? And we're setting those conditions either based on explicit understanding of the message in the context of the contract, or through extracting information out of files. So, anyway.
Tom, sorry, this part on the right, it's automatic extraction. It's not manual, right?
Yeah. So, well, you have to define the events and the conditions. We're working on a prompt editor that will point out where you need to do that, right? So as you're analyzing the contract, you're going to create a model that basically contacts, events, conditions, and deliverables, right? And when you feed the text of the contract into the prompt, it'll give you the proper information. Did I answer your question, Jacob?
I just want to understand if you use the Copilot or whatever LLM tools, they have generic model, large language model, and you extended this model with your own concept of event, condition, contract, and together they produce for you this information.
Correct. Yes. So you can feed in an ontology of the concepts and how they interrelate, and then we combine this with the LLM to do the natural language processing and entity extraction.
That's a great word. Feed ontology,
and it
right?
Works.
Let's remember this.
It works extremely well, by the way. It works extremely well. I generated 100 different contracts and then fed it through them. It's very consistent. Anyway, and then finally, let's look at the deliverable, right? And going back to Denis' comment about we're not sure exactly what's going to occur and how, but we have to add these additional process steps. For instance, the deliverable starts with the inspection itself. That's the trigger work item. The inspector goes out and he inspects the property. When he sends that file back to us, we read the knowledge worker Copilot reads the report and determines whether infestation or damage has been reported on that. Once that report, and by the way, super simple. It does it. There's a standard form for wood destroying insect, right? And you feed it to the through the prompt to the knowledge worker Copilot and say, does this report indicate infestation? And it is completely capable of doing that with just a few lines of prompt. Same thing with damage. Was there structural damage? If those occur in the events of the conducting the deliverable, we spawn new processes, right? We put draft emails into the real estate agents and let him know that he needs to start an infestation branch of that deliverable.
Sorry to interrupt you again. You said very important words with a few lines of prompts. So these lines of prompts you do every time, or this is something what you saved somewhere that you can repeat it for other contracts?
The prompts are stored in a database, right? And then you pull it up and you join the contract's textual information, and it puts this information out.
So can you say that these prompts become part of your knowledge repository?
Yes. Yeah, you would. Go ahead.
Yes. So the prompt is part of the knowledge, and the prompt is configurable or adjusted according to the ontology you work from. So one of the big part of the work we've been doing in the last year has been to generalize this. So last year and the year before, we reported on how we were able to do this and perform with mostly symbolic approach. Now we've introduced the LLMs part a little bit deeper, and we've generalized the approach so we can start from basically your understanding of the domain in which you're going to work, and it will then adjust the prompts according to that knowledge of the domain, and then will then affect this coordination.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you.
So again, this is what we're going to show in our proof of concept or our demonstration, right? And just to drive home the point, when the worker it starts an inspection process with the requirements, the schedules, and the stakeholders, right? We request that deliverable from the inspector, and the inspector will accept the assignment and provide a schedule, and then in their contact information, if that contact information someone else is doing it, right? We place the schedule on the shared calendar. We have a central calendar in Google Workspace or Office 365 that has all this on it, and then we return the inspector does his inspection, returns it to the inspector, right? And the knowledge worker Copilot reads the text of the results, right? Of course, we're storing all the results in the cloud repository, and those results are distributed to the various stakeholders, and the assistance concludes if there's no issue. However, as we saw on the previous screen, if there's infestation, another process is started. Another draft email is added, and he follows kind of a little standard operating procedure for infestation and for damage. So
Another
let's
way
talk
of thinking,
Go ahead.
another way
Yeah.
of thinking of the knowledge worker co-pilot is think of it as, for those of you that are old enough to know what executive secretaries used to be, the executive secretary was very aware of what her executive or his executive was about, what he had to do, made sure to maintain his calendar, made sure to manage his communication, drafted responses for him for his review. That's basically what the knowledge worker co-pilot is. It's that role of that executive secretary that's looking at all the communication, looking at all the to-dos, the calendar, and managing it for the person.
And the contact information, because there's different ways that we grab contact information. So you always have the update phone number and address and email for the people who are stakeholders in the process and have roles in the process. So what are the inner workings? So I added up Denis or Simone, who works with Denis, asked me to add this up, and I added up that there are about 45 different sub-processes by the time we get all the way through to writing draft emails and monitoring them. But so we kind of have a simplified discussion of what that is. So there's a message backbone, right, that creates context, calendar events, and manages the artifacts. By managing artifacts, when you send an email to someone that has an attachment, it knows the context of that email and places it into something like Google Cloud Storage. This allows us to leverage that artifact in prompts and understand, again, what the contents of that artifact is and how it relates to the process that we're working with. So we can stop, schedule, and control knowledge worker processes, not only those knowledge worker processes that are constrained by a contract, but anytime the knowledge worker requests something or wants something to be reviewed and so forth, we automatically start monitoring that and start gathering all of the communications around that request to review or approval. So someone might request, let's say we need to take a personnel action against an individual based on this information, right? And he requests a review of that, and perhaps there's meetings and other discussions. This allows us to aggregate all of that information, and then we can store it over time, and then sort of get to a theory of mind of what were people thinking about that particular knowledge worker process. So that's that last non-event info files. So there are 5, a knowledge worker process itself, right, has 5 different work items that I kind of call. So if you think about it, and again, it's loosely based on a lot of different research and review, but this is what I'm saying is kind of the new calculus of the knowledge worker, right? And so that those 5 items would be request. He requests either a trading partner, a customer, or someone in the organization to provide some type of service or a product, right? And review that can stand separately. Please look at this stuff and provide feedback to me. Decision. In a decision, we look at something and he writes out, we need to decide some way to resolve an issue or a way to get forward. The decision is defined either in the documents or in the text of the email, and all of the stakeholders are then tracked. In resolution would be the other way. Like someone asks me as a knowledge worker to, I say, resolve an issue, right? Provide a deliverable, answer a question, or something of that nature. And then finally, of course, approvals would be taking that particular work item and pushing it up the chain and saying, please, approve this action plan or deliverable. These are all generic, but they're basically baked into the knowledge worker processes that we launch from some kind of contract item. So and they're there. You don't have to specify that. I need to. We don't have a process model that's attached to this particular thing. They can be invoked in the context of completing a contract. So, Denis, do you have any comments on that, or?
No, I was just going to remark that probably everybody must have figured out, or if you haven't, that this is basically a neurosymbolic approach to the problem. So we have this calculus of what are the elements of a knowledge worker copilot and what they do. And that calculus is more on the symbolic side, how we manage and rotate around that, where a lot of the interaction rely on this, on the neuro or the predictive type of model, large language model in particular, to deal with all the perception of communication and interaction.
Yeah, just to kind of like to the digital enterprise suite, we have done a lot of, wouldn't you agree, over the last 4 years, we've done a lot of tweaking as a result of some of these things. Yes. With things like the event-driven subprocess, timers, event-driven subprocess, and so forth.
Yes, and the digital enterprise suite that Tom is referring to is the Trisotech software product.
Okay. So let's go to the next. I'm going to move on from here, but just quickly kind of reiterates the previous point that we were making, right? As part of a either something that's occurring in the context of a contract or some email communication that the knowledge worker initialized, right? Perhaps this is what the process would look like. And so the knowledge worker asks someone to provide some type of service deliverable and the schedule for that service, or he defines when he needs it, right? After the vendor receives the request and we're monitoring this, right, he approves and he gives us a schedule back of when he's going to provide that service, or if he can provide that service, right? So we update our schedule on the calendar, right? And then we send notice of this to the stakeholders, which are included in that individual request, right? Once the vendor completes his deliverable, he returns the result, right? And the result could be files like an invoice or report, right? We take that information, we update the repository, right? And then submit those results to the stakeholder, right? So that's just kind of one end-to-end process. But what I could show here would be some kind of decision, which would say there's I need to have this reviewed, right? And so in the context of that, if he takes that deliverable and sends it to other stakeholders in the organization and says, please review this, then we would spawn another branch automatically of this generic process and start monitoring when is that review going to start to come back. Again, all the while we're accumulating the non-specific communication associated with the particular request. So,
and what's really important here is, although this is shown as kind of a direct skew, and as Tom explained, this is just a notional representation, so people understand. Don't try to execute that and hoping for any magic.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, it's doing a lot of heavy lifting to say that. Anyway, so what does the architecture look like? So at the, the hub of this, where the backbone is happening, is on the Trisotech digital enterprise suite. So as I said, we have roughly 45, and then times that times 4 for the decisions, different processes that are monitoring the knowledge workers' incoming email and deciding what to do with it and how to interact with it. The focus of this is the Office suite, Google Workspace or Office 365. Right. The only other item which I need to add here is that we're going to provide the knowledge worker with a dashboard of what he's doing and when he asked for it to occur. Right. And currently we're working on one on Looker in Google Workspace. Looker is kind of like their affordable dashboard environment that works with Google Analytics. So, and we're not tied to any one large language model. We've tested our prompts with Gemini or OpenAI. So, and then there's other services that we need. For instance, there's a lot of addresses flying around whenever you are creating like contacts, right? And those, so we harmonize all the addresses through Google Map, but you could have other APIs. And then finally, if you're a Plaid subscriber, we can provide or integrate Plaid information along with your KYC information, along with creating the contacts. So, and then again, the Google Cloud storage and the meta storage from Office 365 is part of that. So that's an important part.
So fundamentally, the knowledge worker copilot can operate within right now two Office environments, either the Office 365 environment on Microsoft or the Google Workspace environment in Google.
And where is your editor for your prompts and other what you call the ontology elements, what you added?
They're stored in the process server.
Yes.
Process server.
Yeah, the Trisotech Digital Enterprise, which Tom wrote as process server there, has many different aspects to it. We have workflow and case management. We have decision management. And we also have the Digital Enterprise Graph, which is a knowledge graph that has all the understanding of these process, decision, and case, and also the resolution of the terminology and vernacular that is used specific to these process and decision. And that is then interacting with the large language model to get the extraction and the information according to those ontology that are behind all these symbolic processes and decisions.
It would be helpful to see some examples of view of this editor, or what actually, who can do it? Is a business user can do it, or is it requires more knowledge? So if you can share some screens even after this, you can.
Yeah, we can do that. We can do that. So
or you can add to your presentation, and we will change it on so people will see it.
Yeah, the intent is to create two, which we're working through right now, to create two prompt editors. One prompt editor, right? We have about 18 different prompts that do this thing, right? However, users might want to add their own examples and sentences, but they can't change the core function of the prompt. So we're planning to provide a prompt editor that will allow administrative users in the Office suite to enter sentences and examples that may have failed or not properly done the entity extraction. On the second area, we're designing a prompt editor for documents that will take any document and you'll be able to mark off paragraph by paragraph and ask for a suggestion on what conditions, deliverables, variables, and events might be occurring within that. It will highlight where that occurs, and then you will create your own as ontology of how you're going to respond to that condition, event, or deliverable. So, yes, we recognize the need. It's going to work out of the box for most cases, right? But if you're going to use a contract, you're going to need to create your own prompt. So, Denis?
Yeah, no, I think you've said it all.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let's do a quick demonstration. I think time looks pretty good. So you'll excuse me. I'm reading from the teleprompter here. So anyway, so here at the start of our scenario, right? A real estate agent emails a signed sales contract to his broker. So the knowledge worker copilot will recognize the message and the attachment, and the copilot will then extract and create contact and calendar events, and it will initiate a process that starts it. In this email you see here, I had to provide some additional information, some exogenous information to actually complete the exception. So looking at the contract, we have the contact information. You know, Craig Lent is the seller, Nancy Mace is the purchaser, right? And then we have the seller's company name and address, Blair and Lee Davenport. The important addresses, these are not all of them, it's just a sampling, is when the contract was signed, the deadline for the deposit to be issued, when the purchaser has to obtain commitment for financing, right? And then the all-important settlement date. And of course, 30 days prior to the settlement date is when the earliest we can do our inspection. So after we receive that, we do this extraction, and in the demo here, I'm just showing that we properly created Craig, Nancy, there's a guy there, Lee, and Blair. And so that says we're always going to have their email and information up to date. And so we create a calendar, right? And it has all of those dates in there: the deposit due date, the earliest possible wood destroying insect inspection date, when financial commitment needs to be made, and then of course the all important settlement date. So now it's time to create a wood destroying inspection of the property, right? So the knowledge worker copilot is using a template called the wood destroying insect template and placing a draft email into the contracts folder, right? The email is going to be sent, and the inspector, and of course, will recognize the context and why they're sending it. And the inspector is going to respond with the visit schedule, right? So we'll add the schedule to the contract calendar and move the deliverable status to scheduled. Here we see the template in his workspace, Google Workspace. We'll go ahead and send the information to the inspector.
So basically,
and then
all the work is done by the knowledge coworker,
Yep.
but it is the actual person, the actual agent
Yes.
that takes those drafts and sends them. So he reviews and sends them. So going back to my presentation yesterday, a lot about augmented intelligence as opposed to completely automated artificial intelligence.
Yeah, you can't automatically send that email because there could be something about this inspection that he has to change, right? But what is important is that we have the proper information, the names and addresses and phone numbers and the address of what needs to be inspection there. So the real estate agent's going to go in there and send it to his go-to termite inspection guy, but he might have to add some notes to that. Like, you'll need to avoid Mrs. Jones to the left because she's crazy. I don't know, something like that. So, anyway, so there we have that. So obviously this isn't like totally complete, right? But you kind of get a sense based on our presentation of what the knowledge worker copilot, its objective and the problem that we're trying to solve. So let me finish that. Let you get out. Woo! I need to.
Okay, maybe it's time for questions now. If you finish.
We're very close. Yeah, hold
okay.
on. Just yeah, I guess we're short. Let's go ahead and answer the questions. You can read the benefits later, right? But based on our earlier research, many hours are reduced, and efficiency is really accelerated by this because you've got the right information at the right time, and you also have the calendar schedules, and the different emails are properly drafted, right? And so the basically we can quickly find the information we need and where it is. So you can read the benefits later, but anyway.
Tom, you may want to put the slide up.
Okay, let me put from the current slide.
Answering questions. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, okay, Helmut, go ahead.
There we go.
Very nice. I can see how this would work in practice, but a more theoretical question: have you actually connected two co-pilots with different roles together and remove the manual approval step and just see how they actually do the stuff between themselves?
Well, not in the context of this particular project, but I can refer you back to a project I did in the 90s where we had created a multi-agent system for training military personnel in a anti-submarine aircraft. So basically, this anti-submarine aircraft had a crew of 14 people, and the challenge we were finding within training was that each separate expertise group were being trained separately, and then they had to come back together to train together. And the problem was that one course may be behind or the other course may be. So it was kind of a scheduling problem, but it was really hard to solve. So what we created back then was a multi-agent system that could play the role of any of the crew member. And in that context, you would just say, basically, this crew member is on, this crew member is off. At the time when we did that, that was in the 90s, we used the SOAR architecture for our agents. And that was very interesting project. The approach here is a bit different, but it's the same concept. So yes, we could have the agent, but right now one thing that is important is that the agent themselves don't do any real action themselves. They just prepare everything for the user to do the action. So it will prepare the email, it will prepare the schedule, it will put the calendar reminder, it will do all these things for the user, but it will not act on its own.
No. The comment I would say is that you there's a buyer and a seller role, and almost everything is focused on the seller's role, right? But in a different situation, like let's say you have a design build construction contract, you would have the role of the customer and the role of the construction firm, and so they would take the same contract and have obviously two different prompts. What I need to do as as the construction manager, and what I need to do as the project manager. So there's So the prompts are different depending on the role, are different for the same contract depending on the role that you take in the contract. So it's kind of obvious, but so to answer your question, it would be, yeah, if you did that, you could have knowledge worker for construction company and knowledge worker for a project manager. And they would have different deliverables, different email templates, and different schedules even. Well, the schedules would be the same. That's where they would be. So that's a good question.
Yeah, I took a little bit different his question that he probably can we create Copilot for Copilot to automate what was criticized by Peter today, that you always need human interaction to modify LLMs. On your architectural picture, you have this error from your server to LLM, right? And you enrich your LLM with human prompts and other information. So can we use copilots for this enrichment automatically?
Well, that's theory. The practice is that I certainly personally believe that it's absolutely necessary to have the human in the loop. I come from a military background of Air Force. I spent years arguing with pilots about why we couldn't have autopilots and things like that. It took many, many years before we were at ease with removing the pilots out of the loop. And still today, I don't think people would be too much at ease knowing that, you know, most of the job that's going on in front is done by machines. We still want a pilot sitting in that seat going there. So we're taking the same philosophy here. We're not going towards total automation or total extraction. We're just trying to address a field of work, which is the knowledge work, which has been left out of any automation and support, and try to provide support to them.
More questions, please.
Yeah, the only proviso I would say there is that in certain cases, like when we know that a report or deliverable is going to be forwarded no matter what, we can automatically forward that report. So, but that's just providing information. Or when we've completed a review, we can let everyone know that the review's completed. So there are certain activities that would improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the knowledge worker that could be automated. But anything that is from person to person, your knowledge worker to customer, trading partner, or colleague, that should all be draft. So, anyway.
Okay, thank you, Tom and Denis. It was really a good live demonstration of all advantages we can take from current situation, but also all limitations and necessity to have human in the loop. It's certainly well demonstrated and justified. And you probably would answer more questions during today's panel, but that's it. Thank you very much. I will stop recording.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.